Christmas carols. The man with the wagon came every year, and his arrival was something we looked forward to when I was young. He always sat up in the fountain area of the little mall in my town. He ran a little show similar to things like the Leonard Bernstein animatronic choir or other such holiday entertainment that sometimes came to small towns. I always got excited when I went to the mall and saw the colorful wooden caravan parked in the lot. I would get further excited when I saw the green tarp that he used like a stage curtain to block off his setup. It was like a herald of the season to see that green tarp, and it just didn't feel like Christmas until I knew that the man with the funny tree was going to be there. I grew up in a fairly rural town, but most towns had some kind of mall in the 1990s. Ours was nothing grand, one of those barely holding on kinds of places that was extremely dependent on the JCPenney and the Burlington Coat Factory that occupied the larger spaces. In the middle, there was a food court, a couple of bookstores, some clothing stores, and a Spencer's Gifts that the local Bible thumpers always seemed to be trying to get closed down. The mall was the place we all used to go to hang out, a safe environment where you could go and perish the edifices of capitalism. Nothing bad could happen to you in the mall, at least that's what we thought at the time. The man in the wagon always came the week before Thanksgiving. I say he drove a wagon, but that doesn't really do it justice. What he had was this large, colorful wooden house on wheels, something like an RV that was pulled by mules. It was covered in bright colors and strange symbols, and my mom told me that he had been coming into town for years. He used to set up in the town square from what she told me, and every few years he had some different display, though the content was always the same. When the mall opened up, he began to go there instead. It was where the people were, and the people were what he was after. He used to have a manger scene, and before that, it was a bunch of snowmen, but it's always just a platform for the singing heads. Mom would say, "Yes, you read that, right. The singing heads." The tree that he used was large and seemed to be made of fiberglass, though I suppose it could have been something else. It was about 15 feet high, and in sections that he would drag out of the cart to erect. Once he had the tree in place, he would push out a rolling cart with a tarp over it, and we all knew that's where the funny heads were. You never saw where he unpacked them from, you never saw how they worked, but we all knew what they did. On the first day of December, he would unveil his show. The first time the curtain slid back, we would all laugh and cheer at the sight of the tree with the funny heads covering the limbs. There were 15 in all, and they all hung from the limbs of the tree like ornaments. Each head seemed to know its part, and the songs were always expertly performed. We assumed they were robotic because when they weren't singing, they would close their eyes and almost appear dead. There were 5 that sat on the bottom row, 4 that sat on the second row, 3 on the middle, 2 on the second row from the top, and a single head that sat on the very top of the tree like some grotesque star. They sang the usual holiday fare, Frosty the Snowman, chestnuts roasting on an open fire, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and even the religious songs that kept them in the good graces of the people who were constantly trying to get the Spencer closed. Each show lasted about an hour, and he usually did about 5 a day. He would post the show times on a chalkboard near the ticket booth, and in between shows he could be seen sitting on the edge of the stage and whittling. The town always offered to put the man up in a hotel, thanking him for bringing some holiday cheer to the community, but he always refused and insisted on sleeping in his wagon. "I wouldn't want to be away from my stars for too long," he would say with a sly wink. The man in the tree and the singing heads would stay until the day before Christmas Eve, and then they would disappear just as quickly as they had appeared. We never knew where he went back to, just that he would be back on the last week of November, as he always was. The man was mysterious, but the talking heads and the tree were the real show and the real mystery, I suppose. The man who had assembled the chorus was just as mysterious as they were. He was middle-aged, but I suppose he could have been older. He wore a coal-black suit like an undertaker and had a tall, black hat that completed the mortician look. He had a cane, shiny black shoes that he had polished mirror shine, and I always remember he had the one tooth that winked when he smiled. He was always jolly, and his short white beard reminded me a little of Santa Claus. He always had candy canes for the children who came to see the tree, but there always seemed to be something a little off about him. Even as a kid, my attention held by the tree of singing heads. I remember keeping a wary eye on the man as he grinded and watched the show from the ticket booth. It was the same wary attention I would give people who stood a little too close to children's playground or mumbled to themselves on park benches. It was that wariness we give to people who might not be all there. I looked forward to the arrival of the man in his cart probably longer than I should have. The mystery of the tree and the singing heads would persist until I was nearly out of high school, though I wish now I had never found out. I might be happier if I had remained a mystery. I was 17 and working at hot dog on a stick while I smiled as I saw the old man pushing his trolley towards the fountain area. He had the bottom part of the tree perched precariously on that hand truck, and I just knew that soon the mall would be full of the sound of the holidays. Carol, one of my coworkers at the stand, snorted and said she couldn't believe they let the creepy old guy come back every year. I looked shocked, but then I remembered that Carol's family had only moved here 2 years ago. They had come up from Gladstone, a bigger town about 3 hours up the road, and this would only be her second year seeing the man and his caroling heads. He's not creepy, I insisted, though I didn't quite believe it myself. I love his Christmas show, most people in town do. Really? Carol asked, how long has he been coming around? I assumed he was newish since he's clearly trying to cash in on the whole animatronic fad. Since I was a little kid, I told her he's been coming around for at least the 17 years that I've been alive, and Mom said he's been coming around longer than that. Carol made a halfway interested sound at this, and we watched him make several trips back and forth to the wagon as he set up his tarp and began setting up the tree. Other people had taken notice too, and there was an air of excitement as they marked the old man's return. I call him the old man, but he always looked exactly the same. He could always have passed for middle-aged. He never seemed to get any larger or smaller, and other than his white beard, he never seemed to gray or wrinkle as old-timers sometimes did. People watched him as he came and went, and as the top of the tree rose above the tarp, we all secretly waited for the first week of December. I was especially excited this year. I would have a prime seat for nearly every performance as I stood here and sold lemonade and hot dogs on sticks. I had been happy to take the job after being let go when the shoe carnival closed up, and part of it was because I knew I'd be able to watch the Christmas tree and its singing heads. The man still gave me the creeps, though I had hidden it deep for as long as I could remember, but I looked forward to the show nonetheless. I couldn't wait to see if he had added any new Christmas songs this year, and Carol likely got tired of my constant speculation. Carol seemed less excited, but was definitely interested to see what the old guy would bring to the table this year. I was working the first day he opened that curtain, and to my surprise, they had added not a new song, but another head. There were 16 now, the bottom row now holding 6, and it threw off some of the symmetry that had existed in the years before. The man took the stage and made a bow, telling everyone he was glad to see them for another year. Then he lifted his conductor's baton and started the show. All the heads opened their eyes as if they had only been waiting for a signal, and as they broke into a rendition of "O Come All Ye Faithful," Carol gave a long shudder and said she didn't know how she was going to work here for the next 4 weeks with all that going on. "Are you kidding?" I asked. "We get a front row seat for every performance. We don't even have to buy a ticket. It's kind of cool." She gave me a look like I might be brain damaged. "Tell me this doesn't seem normal to you?" "Well, yeah, it's a yearly thing. The cart rolls in, the man sets up, and then the first day of December we hear the singing heads, just as we did the year before." She pursed her lips, like she was trying to find the most diplomatic way to say what was on her mind, and finally decided on the truth. "You know that nowhere else does anything like this, right?" I furrowed my brow, having never thought about it before. "I mean, they must do something like this. I'm sure there are weird little holiday activities in every town." "Yeah, but nothing like this. This is just sick. Who makes robot heads that sing Christmas carols? The whole thing is like a Twilight Zone episode. I don't know how any of you guys enjoy this," she said, going to the back to count sticks. I just shook my head as some fella came up to buy a hot dog on a stick and found my eyes wandering back to the show throughout the day. We did amazing business that month, thanks in part to people coming over to get snacks before the show. The man put on 5 shows a day, the last one ending about 10 minutes before the mall closed, and he always packed his heads back on the dolly and wheeled them out after the crowd had left. I remember wanting to go talk to him, tell him how much the show meant to me, but I couldn't quite bring myself to. Even as an adult, at least that's how I thought of myself, I was still a little hesitant to approach him. I remembered the way he made me feel as a kid, the polar opposite of the singing head, and always watched him shuffle back to his cart from afar. It was December 21st, 4 days before Christmas, when I learned something about the show that would change my memories of it forever. Carol and I were, once again, manning the stand when a camera crew came up to talk to the man in between shows. He was preparing for the final show of the night, tickets already beginning to sell, when a lady from Channel 4 News approached the booth and asked him if they could interview for a piece they were doing on the mall. He tried to put her aside gently, saying he had a show starting in about 30 minutes, but she pestered him until he agreed to do an interview and he finally walked off with her. As we watched him leave, Carol got a strange in her eye and seemed to be planning mischief. "Hey," she said suddenly, "let's go have a closer look at those heads." My mouth came open a little bit, and I asked her if she was crazy. No one got near the stage, no one. The man's demeanor was usually jolly, but anyone who tried to get close to the stage saw a different side of him come out. He could be scary if the mood took him, and those who attempted to touch or get close to his singing heads discovered that the hard way. He had never hurt anyone, not that I had ever seen, but he definitely made them change their mind through some kind of sorcery. Even the surliest of teenagers or the brattiest of kids quailed beneath his softly spoken words and his harsh glances, and very few people attempted to go near the stage. "No one goes near the stage," I told Carol. "Yeah, because he's always guarding it. He's stepped away, so now we can go have a look." She explained it as if she was talking to a child, and I felt the same as I repeated to her that no one went near the stage. "Oh, come on. Aren't you a little bit curious to know what they are and how they work? It's got to be something with the baton, maybe some kind of advanced robotics if they can sing all those songs. I don't see any wires from here, do you? He's got to be some kind of skilled tinkerer if he's controlling them with nothing but that cheap plastic wand. Don't you want to see how it works?" I did. I was very curious, but it seemed wrong to look. It was like knowing how a magician did his tricks, and it might take some of the magic out of it if I knew that the rabbit had been in the hat the whole time. "Oh, come on," she said. "Where are you, scared?" She was moving before I could answer, and I just got swept up in it. I wasn't scared, not really, but I didn't want her to go by herself either. I was honestly worried that if she went alone I would never see her again, and she had become one of my best friends in the time we'd worked together. We hung out outside of work, we went to the same school together too, and I liked Carol in that way we sometimes become attached to people. I really didn't want anything to happen to her, and after tossing down a "back in 10 minutes" sign, I followed behind her. The crowd was sparse this early, just a couple of people wanting to get good seats for the last show of the evening, and it was easy to move behind the curtain and into the shadowy area backstage. The light came in from the overheads, but the curtain still cast the bottom part of the tree and a small shadowy bank. The heads looked a little grisly with their eyes closed, seemingly asleep, and now that I was close, they looked less magical and more creepy. He had decorated his Christmas tree with severed heads, it appeared, and now that I could look at them properly, I could see that they were hanging from their own braided strands of hair. They swung from the bows like hanged men and women, and Carol seemed amazed by them. "Wow," she said, getting right up on one of the heads, "these are amazing. What do you think it is? Some kind of robot or maybe some weird ventrilo," but she never finished her thought. The head, a dark-haired man with a short beard, opened his eyes and looked at her. The two held the gaze of the other for a long moment, and then the head began to scream. The scream was high and terrifying, and as the other heads woke up, they too took up the scream. The 16 heads began to keen in unison, lifting their voices to the sky as they shrieked and moaned. I could hear the crowd on the other side of the curtain, confused cries coming from the children as the adults began to call for help. "Carol, we have to go." Carol couldn't hear me, though. Carol was screaming as the heads bellowed their fear and rage to the ceiling of our cheap mall. I heard someone coming, the gravely voice telling them that everything was okay and that they should return to their seats. I knew that voice, and I did not want him to catch me back here. Even at 17, I was still a little afraid of the man in the dark suit, and I'm ashamed to say that I ran for my life. I fled into the mall, hiding in a bathroom for about half an hour before finally coming back to find the performance in full swing as if nothing had happened. I never saw Carol again, but the man and his singing heads never came back either. I never knew why they stopped coming, but I was a little grateful for their absence. The memory of those screaming heads would haunt me for years to come, and I can remember waking up in a cold sweat as I remembered their open mouths and mourning faces. In my dreams, Carol was still screaming, and when she looked at me, her head would flop sideways and fall off her neck. In my dreams, I couldn't run. All I could do was watch. I hadn't thought about the choir of heads for many years, but I was reminded of them today. I have kids of my own now, 6 and 13, and I've moved away from the little podunk town I grew up in. I went to college and now I work in the library of said college. That's where I met my husband, and that's actually where he proposed to me. We've been together for 14 years, and we couldn't be happier. Anyway, that's not what you're interested in, so I'll get to it. I had dragged the kids to a winter carnival that was being held at the fairground. It wasn't a huge event, just a couple of fair rides, some craft tables, and some food vendors, but as we got deeper into the event, I began to hear singing. My youngest was interested, thinking it was a local choir or something, and my oldest came along behind us like an angsty balloon. He clearly thought himself too cool for something like this, but if he wanted a ride home, he knew he had better keep up with us. I saw the top of the tree before I saw anything else, and the sight of that head perched at the tippy top made me want to scream. Its lips moved as it sang about a little drummer boy, and I was filled with the old fear again. My youngest wanted to get closer, thinking the heads were funny, but I scooped him up and told them both we were leaving. My youngest cried, not wanting to leave yet, but my older son was up and moving before I was. He was done with the festivities and was glad to see I was too. I nearly sideswiped another car on my way out of the parking lot, and I was off and running as my kids made various complaints in the back seat. That new head would play a part in any nightmares I would have, and for good reason. It would appear that Carol had discovered the secret of those heads the hard way. No one had seen her again after that, and her parents had still been looking for her when I went to college. I didn't tell the police anything, and they never came to ask me. I just knew that I would get in trouble if they found out what I had been doing, and when the man and his car had left early that year, I assumed it was a mystery I would never know the answer to. Now I knew better, and I suppose Carol did too. Her head sat atop the tree at its place of honor, singing all the old holiday classics the heads had sung every year. I told the kids to play as I went to my sewing room, just sitting here as I wrote this little confession of inaction. I have no idea what to do, and I'm not sure that anyone would believe me anyway. So if you see the tree of singing heads this year, just remember to keep your distance. Otherwise, you might be the new star of their little Christmas special.